For Etobicoke North.
Mr. Speaker, 3 months ago, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights visited the Central African Republic, or CAR, and condemned the slow response of the international community. She asked, quote, "How many more children have to be decapitated? How many more women and girls will be raped? How many more acts of cannibalism must there be before we really sit up and pay attention?" End of quote. Thus far, over 140,000 people have been killed in CAR. 80% of the Muslim population has been driven from their homes or murdered. The fighting has left 2.5 million people needing humanitarian aid, the equivalent of Vancouver's population. The children of CAR have and continue to witness terrible violence, maiming, killing. The number of children being treated for severe malnutrition in the capital has tripled since January. And this year, UNICEF and partners have already secured the release of more than 1,000 children from armed groups, or more than 5 times the number of children released in 2013. Mr. Speaker, throughout the country, violence has escalated in plain sight of diplomats, foreign observers, peacekeepers, and the world's media. Speaking of CAR, a doctor from Médecins Sans Frontières noted, "The people here don't die of bullets. They die because of a lack of will to help them." Mr. Speaker, for too long the international community has sat idly by and watched atrocities unfold in CAR. Rather than assisting and supporting this failed state and making the long-term commitment to create a functioning, responsive, and accountable security sector, a proper army and police force, and building a functioning justice system alongside other essential public institutions. On April 10, 2014, the United Nations Security Council last adopted a resolution to authorize the establishment of a UN peacekeeping operation of almost 12,000 by September 2014 to build on the work of the African Union-led international support mission in CAR, French forces, and the EU forces that have joined them. Mr. Speaker, to the government, is the number and kind of peacekeepers enough? Is September too late for these forces to make a significant difference? Where has Canada's voice gone on the responsibility to protect? Mr. Speaker, for 5 months I have repeatedly asked the government what more it could do to provide humanitarian aid, reduce the violence, rebuild civil society, and support peace and reconciliation in CAR. And we have repeatedly asked about Canada's potential participation in the UN peacekeeping mission in CAR. Mr. Speaker, on May 16th, when I again asked in Parliament whether the government would provide peacekeeping support in line with our capabilities, the Parliamentary Secretary seemed to signal movement but remained troublingly vague with, quote, "Canada has been contributing and we will continue to contribute to the United Nations for peacekeeping forces for the Central African Republic," end of quote. Mr. Speaker, will the Parliamentary Secretary confirm tonight whether Canada will provide such peacekeeping support and what kind? Blanket statements of support are not helping the children of CAR. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to be here early in the evening like this. The situation in the Central African Republic is deeply disturbing for Canada and for Canadians. The Central African Republic was a country where religions once coexisted in peace and mutual respect. It's troubling to see how quickly this situation has deteriorated into conflict and into violence. To this day, the lootings, rapes, and indiscriminate killings continue. Sadly, more than 1 million people have been forcibly displaced as a direct result of violence, and this situation must stop. Canada has strongly condemned the violence in the Central African Republic and urged all parties to show restraint, to exercise restraint, and to end the cycle of violence. The government has supported international efforts to stop the conflict, promote the protection of civilians, and help the most vulnerable have access to life-saving assistance. For example, last December, our country was the first country to contribute to the UN Trust Fund in support of the African Union Peace Mission in the CAR, or MISCA as it was called. The government gave $5 million to support African Union troops with vital communications equipment to enable them to accomplish their missions and help the people of Central African Republic. Mr. Speaker, since the start of 2013, Canada has contributed over $23 million for humanitarian assistance. This assistance is providing food, water, and sanitation health care and protection services to those most in need. We're also funding air transportation so that humanitarian workers are able to get safely in and out of remote and insecure regions of the CAR where people are in most desperate need of help. In sum, through our financial assistance, Canada has been making a difference, especially in the lives of those most vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, as colleagues in the House are aware, the United Nations Security Council agreed in April to create a UN mission to replace MISCA in September 2014. My colleague is speaking to that. This new mission, called MINUSCA, has a broad mandate which includes the protection of civilians, support for a political transition, support for humanitarian assistance, and the promotion and protection of human rights and the rule of law. A UN team was recently on the ground in the Central African Republic to finalize the operational planning for MINUSCA. Based on this recent assessment, the UN will begin to ask member states to support the specific needs of this mission. Based on these needs, our government will decide on how Canada can best contribute to that mission. As we have already stated publicly, Canada will not be sending companies or infantry groups of the Canadian Armed Forces. But there are some other ways that we can and will support the UN mission and the overall objective of ending the conflict in the Central African Republic. As we did when the when the AU mission was established in December, the government will respond expeditiously in support of the new UN mission. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Etobicoke North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We look forward to hearing how the government will support in a substantial way the United Nations peacekeeping mission. Will the government provide additional non-budgetary assistance beyond its assessed and financial contributions? Will the government provide airlift assistance as it provided to efforts in Mali and other resources, as these could make a substantial difference on the ground? Our allies, and not just France, the UK and the US, are stepping up by taking a more active role in CAR. For example, Germany has authorized the deployment of up to 80 troops, air transport, and a hospital plane to support the EU efforts. It has ruled out the use of German forces in combat. Will Canada send specialized military assets, and will it help build the capacity of Francophone African peacekeepers as we did in Mali? And will Canada uphold the responsibility to protect? Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I'd like to thank the member opposite for her comments. I know everyone in this House is concerned about the situation in Central African Republic. While the roots of the conflict are not religious, rebel groups and rival factions have been able to use religion to provoke intercommunal hatred and violence. The rampant human rights abuses and the extrajudicial killings must stop. The Government of Canada has not been silent. We have taken action. We have condemned the violence. We've been an important source of humanitarian assistance, and we have supported African troops under the MISCA banner. The member opposite will be glad to hear that we will continue to support international efforts to stop the violence in the Central African Republic. I'm sure we can count on the support of every member of Parliament. Thank you.
The honourable member for Lac Saint Louis.